The sleek black Tesla pulled silently into the circular driveway of the sprawling Mediterranean estate, its electric engine making no sound to announce the unexpected arrival of its owner. Marcus Wellington had built his software empire on the principle of always being 3 steps ahead of the competition, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to witness through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his own living room. As he stepped out of his car, briefcase in hand after cutting short a business trip to Singapore, the sound of laughter drifted from inside the house. Real, genuine laughter that he hadn't heard from his 7-year-old twin daughters in the 6 months since their mother had passed away from cancer. Marcus had hired Elena Rodriguez 3 weeks ago, selecting her from dozens of candidates not because of her impeccable references or her fluency in 4 languages, but because something in her warm brown eyes reminded him of the compassion his late wife Catherine had possessed. At 62, Elena had raised 5 children of her own while working various domestic positions for wealthy families throughout California, and her calm demeanor during the interview had suggested she might be exactly what his grief-stricken household needed. What he observed through the window, however, stopped him cold in his Italian leather shoes. Elena sat cross-legged on the Persian rug in the center of the living room, her gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing the practical uniform he provided for all household staff. But she wasn't dusting the priceless artwork or organizing the designer furniture as he paid her to do. Instead, she was surrounded by flour, eggs, and what appeared to be half the contents of his gourmet kitchen, while his daughters, Emma and Sophie, knelt beside her with their matching blonde hair tied back in colorful bandanas, their designer clothes covered in what looked like chocolate and flour. Now, "Miss Niñas," Elena was saying in her gentle, accented voice, "the secret to perfect empanadas is in how you seal the edges. Your abuela taught me this when I was even younger than you." She demonstrated the technique with practiced hands, showing the girls how to crimp the dough with a fork. "You press like this, see? With love and patience, because cooking is about more than food. It's about sharing our hearts with the people we care about." Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat as he watched his daughters, who had barely spoken above a whisper since their mother's funeral, chattering excitedly in a mixture of English and the Spanish words Elena had been teaching them. Emma, usually the more reserved of the twins, was laughing as she tried to copy Elena's technique, flour streaking across her cheek. Sophie, who had refused to eat properly for weeks, was actually stealing pieces of the filling and popping them into her mouth with obvious delight. "Elena," Sophie said, her voice bright with curiosity, "will you teach us the song your mama used to sing when you cooked together?" "Sí, mi amor," Elena replied, her weathered hands gently guiding Sophie's smaller ones as they worked the dough together. "It's a very old song passed down through many generations of women in my family. But first, tell me, what do you remember about your mama when she was in the kitchen with you?" Marcus gripped his briefcase tighter, watching through the window as his daughters' faces grew thoughtful. He had avoided the kitchen entirely since Catherine's death, unable to bear the memories of weekend mornings when she would make pancakes while the girls sat on the counter, chattering about their dreams and plans. He had instructed the various housekeepers to prepare meals, but keep the girls out of the kitchen, believing it would be too painful for them to be reminded of what they had lost. "Mama used to let us crack the eggs," Emma said softly, her small hands still working with the empanada dough, "and she would sing while she cooked. She said cooking was like magic because you could take simple ingredients and turn them into something that made people happy." "Your mama was very wise," Elena said, reaching over to tuck a strand of Emma's hair behind her ear. "And you know what? That magic is still here, inside both of you. When we cook with love, when we remember the people who taught us, they're never really gone." Through the window, Marcus watched as Elena began to hum a gentle melody, something warm and lilting that seemed to fill the room with a peace he hadn't felt in months. The girls joined in, humming along with words they didn't know but somehow understood. And for the first time since Catherine's death, the massive house felt like a home instead of a monument to loss. But what happened next completely shattered Marcus's carefully maintained emotional walls. "Elena," Sophie said quietly, her 7-year-old voice taking on the serious tone she used when asking important questions. Do you think Mama can see us making empanadas? Elena paused in her work, considering the question with the gravity it deserved. What do you think, mi niña? I think she can, Sophie replied with the simple faith of childhood. Because when we're cooking and laughing like this, it feels like she's here with us. Like maybe she's teaching us through you. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled as she pulled both girls into a flower-dusted embrace. You know what I think? I think your mama chose me to come here to this family because she knew you needed someone who would remember that love is what makes a house feel like home. And not the kind of love you can buy in stores, but the kind you make with your hands and share with your family. Marcus found himself leaning against the window frame, his carefully controlled businessman's demeanor cracking as he watched the most important transaction of his life, one that had nothing to do with money or contracts or market shares. Elena wasn't just teaching his daughters to cook. She was teaching them that joy could exist alongside grief, that tradition could bridge the gap between past and present, and that sometimes the most valuable lessons came not from expensive tutors or exclusive schools, but from someone who understood that children needed to feel connected to something larger than their immediate loss. The sound of his phone buzzing brought Marcus back to the present moment. His assistant in Singapore was probably wondering why he had abruptly canceled the rest of his meetings and boarded the company jet without explanation. But as he watched Elena help his daughters clean flour from their faces while they waited for the empanadas to bake, he realized that no business deal in the world was more important than what was happening in his living room. He quietly opened the front door, setting down his briefcase and removing his suit jacket. The house smelled like home-cooked food and happiness, scents that had been absent for far too long. As he approached the kitchen, he could hear Elena's voice mixed with his daughter's laughter, and he paused in the doorway to observe the scene he had been missing. "Papi!" Emma spotted him first, her face lighting up with excitement, instead of the careful politeness she had been showing him for months. "Elena is teaching us to make empanadas like her abuela Maid. And we learned Spanish words, and we sang Mama's favorite song, but in Spanish." Sophie ran to him, her small hands leaving flowery prints on his expensive shirt as she hugged his legs. "We made extra for you, Papi." Elena said families that cook together stay together, and we want to stay together forever and ever. Elena rose from her position on the floor, her expression shifting from surprise at his unexpected return to concern about being caught outside her prescribed duties. "Mr. Wellington, I apologize. The girls asked to help with lunch preparation, and I thought—" "Elena," Marcus interrupted, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. "Don't apologize. What I just witnessed through that window, it's the first time my daughters have seemed like children instead of little ghosts since their mother died." He knelt down to his daughter's level, pulling them both into an embrace that smelled like flower and love and possibility. "Tell me about these empanadas," he said, looking between Elena and the girls. "And this Spanish song. And everything else I've been missing while I was working so hard to provide for you that I forgot what you actually needed." Over the next hour, as they waited for the empanadas to finish baking, Elena shared stories of her own childhood in Mexico, of cooking with her grandmother and learning that recipes were more than ingredients. They were family history passed down through generations. She spoke about her own children, now grown with families of their own, and how cooking had been the thread that kept them connected even during difficult times. Marcus found himself opening up in return, sharing memories of Catherine that he had been too afraid to voice, afraid that speaking about her would make the girls sadder. But Elena's gentle wisdom helped him understand that avoiding his wife's memory wasn't protecting his daughters, it was depriving them of the connection to their mother that they desperately needed. "Mr. Wellington," Elena said as they sat around the kitchen island eating warm empanadas that tasted better than any meal he had ever purchased at five-star restaurants. "Your daughters don't need perfect meals or perfect rooms or perfect schedules. They need to feel loved and connected and safe. They need to remember their mama through joy, not just through sadness." Emma leaned against his arm, contentment radiating from her small frame. "Papi, can Elena teach us more recipes? She knows how to make tres leches cake, and she said Mama would have loved it because it's made with 3 kinds of love." 3 kinds of love? Marcus asked, looking at Elena with curiosity. Evaporated milk, condensed milk, and heavy cream, Elena explained with a smile. But also the love of the person who makes it, the love of the people who share it, and the love that connects us to everyone who made it before us. Marcus felt tears he had been holding back for months finally begin to flow. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. When I hired you, I thought I was paying for housekeeping and childcare. But what you've given my family today, there's no salary that could cover the value of what you've done. Elena studied his face carefully. What are you asking, Mr. Wellington? I'm asking if you would be willing to help me learn how to be a father again, instead of just a provider. I'm asking if you'd consider becoming less of an employee and more of a family advisor. Someone who can teach all 3 of us how to honor Catherine's memory while still building a life that includes laughter and traditions and hope. Elena was quiet for a long moment, looking between Marcus and his daughters, who were listening with the intense attention children reserve for conversations they sense will change their lives. Mr. Wellington, she said finally, I have worked for many wealthy families over the years. I have cleaned their houses and cared for their children and watched them try to solve emotional problems with money and possessions. But what your daughters need, what you all need, cannot be purchased. It can only be shared. She paused, reaching over to take Emma and Sophie's flowery hands in her own. If you truly want me to help your family heal, then yes, I will stay. But not as a maid or a nanny. As someone who understands that the most important lessons in life happen around kitchen tables and in living rooms covered in flower, where people remember that love is an action, not just a feeling. 6 months later, the Wellington house had been transformed. Not through expensive renovations or interior designers, but through the accumulation of small, daily acts of love and connection. Elena had moved into the guest house on the property, officially employed as a family coordinator, but functioning as something much more valuable, a bridge between the family's painful past and hopeful future. The kitchen had become the heart of the house, where Elena taught Marcus to make Catherine's favorite coffee cake, while the girls learned to prepare traditional Mexican dishes that connected them to Elena's heritage. Sunday mornings were reserved for cooking together, sharing stories, and maintaining the traditions Catherine had started while creating new ones that honored both her memory and their evolving family. Structure. Marcus had restructured his business commitments to be present for these moments, realizing that no amount of financial success could compensate for missing his daughter's childhood. He had learned to measure wealth not in dollars or possessions, but in laughter around the dinner table, in flower fights that required extensive cleanup, and in the kind of deep security that comes from knowing you are loved unconditionally. Elena's wisdom had taught them all that grief and joy could coexist, that honoring the past didn't mean avoiding the future, and that sometimes the most important people in our lives come disguised as employees, teachers, or unexpected angels who remind us what really matters. The day Marcus came home, early from Singapore, and found his daughters, learning to make empanadas changed more than their dinner plans. It changed their understanding of what family could look like, how love could be expressed, and why the simple act of cooking together had the power to heal hearts that had been broken by loss and mend them with hope.